Welcome to Property Disclosures, another episode in Tom's Next Level Exam Prep series. I am Tom, and I designed this series to help you pass your real estate exams, just like I've helped hundreds of my previous students. I urge you to watch my Welcome and my Exam Insights and Strategies videos for a complete overview of this entire series. You will learn how to get the most benefit out of these topical videos. Here's some important information from my welcome video. In these videos, I focus on the test itself. I like to say I put you in test world. I'm not going to review the information much. I'm not going to reteach the information, but my videos are designed to be a supplement to what you already have from your education provider. So with that in mind, I encourage you, please take a lot of notes when you watch my videos. Well, if you're ready, grab your course materials and a notebook for all your notes. Keep your positive attitude up, and let's get started with property disclosures. Sellers today are certainly required to make seller's property disclosures. They're required to disclose to buyers what they know about the property. The forms they use to disclose that can vary by state. However, in almost all states, sellers are required to disclose, first of all, material facts. Remember what a material fact is: anything that might affect a buyer's decision. That can be on the property itself or external to the property. But these are the testable points regarding sellers' disclosures. They must disclose material facts. The owner should complete the seller's disclosure. Notice below it says never the agent. They'll ask you that on the test, and don't fall into that trap when you're in the marketplace. Do not help the seller with their seller's disclosure form. If something gets disclosed improperly and you had a hand on the form, it could cause you some issues in the marketplace. So the owner completes, never the agent. A very stressed point on the test also. The sellers only need to complete the form to the best of their actual knowledge. Sellers are not giving a warranty. There's never been a problem with a flooding in the basement. They're simply saying, I have no knowledge of the basement ever flooding. So that's a key point that will also be drilled down and made clear on one or two test questions. And I already mentioned that the forms that sellers use for disclosures will vary by each state. Please be sure in your state what's defined as a material fact. Generally, it's any fact that might affect a buyer's decision. Physical condition of the property, environmental situations around the property, things external to the property. Some of those material fact definitions are pretty subjective, especially when they say anything that might affect a buyer's decision. If you're in the flight path to an airport, and airplanes are overhead 3 times a day, sound like they're going to land on your house. Should that be disclosed? Absolutely, because it might affect a buyer's decision. Here's some other definitions for seller's disclosures for your exam. The difference between visible defects versus latent defects. Remember, visible defects are ones you can see clearly, but a latent defect is one that's hidden. It's behind a wall. We as real estate licensees are not responsible to discover latent defects. But if a seller knows there is mold behind a wall, they are required to disclose that. And buyers can actually take action against the seller, and the seller could incur some penalties if the buyer can prove fraud. But the key there is the burden of proof is on the buyer to prove that the seller knew of a condition but did not disclose it. Sometimes that's an easy burden of proof, and sometimes it's not. You'll also want to take a look on your state and find out when disclosures are required to be made. I'm up here in Minnesota. In my state, like other states, they require the disclosure to be made before the seller signs a purchase agreement. Or maybe the disclosure has to be made when the seller signs a listing agreement. But the question on the test is not going to be, when does the seller normally make these disclosures? The question on your exam is going to be, when is the seller required to make those disclosures? So make sure you know what that trigger is. And these disclosure requirements can all vary by individual states. Several very testable points about the lead-based paint disclosure that you've discussed in your classes. What's the trigger date? If the house was built before 1/1/1978. Remember that date. That's important for lead-based paint disclosures. And what are the other parameters that you'll need to know? What must sellers do? What must buyers do? Sellers are required to disclose the presence of any lead-based paint that they know about. I actually had a seller once ask me, do I have to disclose lead-based paint if I don't know about it? And I thought, think about what you just asked me. So no, they're only required to disclose what they know about, okay? Seller must provide the booklet. Lead-based paint in your home. Sellers must provide that. Agents are required to make sure that the sellers do provide those booklets. What does the seller not have to do? They don't have to remove any lead-based paint that there is. They simply have to tell a buyer, I know about some in that room, that's where lead-based paint is. Buyers have to be given, by law, a 10-day right to inspect the property. Buyers have to be given that 10-day right to inspect. But the buyer can waive the 10 days if they want to. These are all key points that are very testable. What if the buyer says, I don't care if there's lead-based paint or not, I'm going to tear most of the house down and do a whole rehab job. So a buyer might just waive the 10 days, let's get started. But sellers don't have to remove it. Buyers have to be given the 10 days, but buyers may waive the 10 days inspection period if they choose. You'll want to remember some of the key words as they're associated with some of the different environmental hazards. And this is a good spot for me to remind you, in all of your studies and all my videos, I bring this up and say, I'm a big believer in word association lists. Whether it's legal descriptions or other topics in the material, word association lists, if you make your own and write them down, you're more likely to remember them. And this is a good example on this slide. Asbestos. If there's asbestos present, what are the two methods to deal with asbestos? The two are encapsulation or abatement. Abatement, removal, encapsulation is sealing up. Okay? Is there any federal disclosure law for asbestos? No, there's not. But word associations, asbestos, abatement, or encapsulation. How about radon? Radon's another hazardous material. How is radon dealt with? Well, radon is mitigated. So radon, word association, is mitigated. How is radon mitigated? Typically through a ventilation system. Is there any federal disclosure for radon? No, but your state may have some for both asbestos and or radon, so be sure and check that in your state material. And mold. Are sellers required to disclose mold? Yeah, if they know of mold in the house, they must disclose it. But again, there's no federal disclosure law for mold. Here's two acronyms about sellers' disclosures that'll show up probably somewhere on your exam. One is CERCLA. CERCLA established a superfund for cleaning up hazardous waste sites. It also regulated how they can be cleaned up and how they're handled and disposed of. The other acronym is SARA. It was an amendment to CERCLA, and it stressed permanent remedies for dealing with hazardous waste sites. So for the exam, just remember CERCLA and SARA. Here's two more environmental acts that will likely show up on the test in a question or two. One of them is the Clean Air Act, pretty self-explanatory, regulates air emissions. Take a note, and underneath that it says it authorizes the EPA to regulate emissions of air pollutants. That could easily be framed in a test question. Which of the following acts authorize the EPA to regulate air emissions? That will be the Clean Air Act. Clean Water Act, also pretty self-explanatory, regulates the discharge of pollutants into the water and establishes quality standards for surface waters. So they may find a way to ask the question forward or backwards, what does this act do? Or here's something that one of the acts does, which act does these certain things. So watch how they phrase those on the exam. And those are the key testable points on the national test for property disclosures. There's many more property disclosure regulations on your state level, so please follow up and make sure you know what your state-specific regulations are. But thank you for watching. I really appreciate that. Here's a list of my national exam topic videos. If you feel a need to refresh yourself or brush up on one of these topics, by all means, take a look at that video. But stay positive, stay focused, and I wish you great luck on your test. As always, if you like my videos, hit the icon down below. If you subscribe to my video series, I will send you updates when I release more videos about my career prep series and my skills prep series, and I'll keep you updated when those are available. If you'd like to make a comment, I would love to hear your comments. And if you know somebody else that's in the process of getting their real estate license and you want to share these videos with them, please feel free to do that also. Thank you very much.